Clint Eastwood, the granite-faced icon who would become Hollywood's most legendary cowboy, has conquered the silver screen for over 6 decades. But at 30 years old, in 1960, he was nobody, a struggling television actor trapped in a dying Western series, a man who'd spent his entire 20s begging for scraps, a father working construction, between bit parts, just to feed his family. The world didn't know Clint Eastwood yet, and Clint Eastwood was running out of time. This is the devastating story of a man who Hollywood rejected dozens of times, who was told his Adam's apple was too big, his teeth were too crooked, his acting was too wooden, who watched younger actors skip past him while he played cowboy number 3 in forgettable westerns. At 30, most actors have either made it or accepted defeat. Clint Eastwood stood at that exact crossroads. But behind his quiet determination lies a story not glamorous, but brutal. If Clint Eastwood has ever made you believe in second chances, hit like as tribute to his relentless persistence. This is the story of a man who Hollywood threw away, who spent a decade in obscurity, and who refused to quit when every logical voice told him to give up. This is Clint Eastwood at 30, broke, desperate, and one terrible decision away from disappearing forever. May 31st, 1930, San Francisco, California. Clint Eastwood Jr. was born during the Great Depression, marked not by celebration, but by survival. His father, Clinton Sr., spent the 1930s chasing work across the West Coast like a ghost chasing shadows. Manufacturing plants, gas stations, anything that paid. The Eastwood family moved constantly: Sacramento, Piedmont, Oakland, Glendale, never settling, never stable. Clint attended 8 different schools before graduating high school. 8 schools, 8 chances to be the new kid, 8 chances to fight for respect. He grew tall and quiet, 6 feet 4 by age 15, the kind of kid who learned early that silence was safer than speaking, that blending in was survival. After high school in 1948, Clint worked as a lumberjack in Oregon, then a steelworker. Then he got drafted into the U.S. Army during the Korean War in 1951. But even the military rejected him from combat. They stationed him at Fort Ord in California as a swimming instructor, a 6 feet 4 soldier teaching other soldiers how to swim, while real men fought overseas. It was humiliating. Then came 1951, the plane crash. Clint was flying from Seattle to California when the Navy bomber ran out of fuel over the Pacific Ocean. The plane went down. Clint and the pilot swam miles through freezing water to reach shore. He almost died at 21, but he didn't talk about it, didn't dramatize it, just survived it and moved on. That was Clint Eastwood, silent, stubborn, unkillable. After discharge in 1953, he enrolled at Los Angeles City College studying business administration. But the classes bored him. A girlfriend suggested he try acting. So he did, and Hollywood laughed at him. 1954, Clint Eastwood was 24 years old when he signed his first studio contract with Universal Pictures. They paid him $75 a week, $75 to stand in the background of forgettable films, to say one line and disappear, to be sailor number 2 and lab technician and first Saxon. Universal had one assessment of Clint Eastwood: you have a chip on your tooth, your Adam's apple sticks out too far, and you talk too slow. They dropped him in 1955. Then RKO Pictures gave him a chance. Same result, dropped. Between 1955 and 1958, Clint appeared in 18 films and television shows. Nobody remembered him. Nobody cared. He worked construction, dug swimming pools in Beverly Hills for people who wouldn't hire him to act, came home with dirt under his fingernails, while his wife Maggie worked as a secretary to keep them afloat. They lived in a small apartment in Los Angeles. No money, no prospects. Clint was 28 years old and going nowhere. Then came 1958. A struggling television western called Rawhide needed a young actor to play Rowdy Yates, the ramrod of a cattle drive. The part paid $750 per episode. Clint Eastwood auditioned. And got it. Finally. After 4 years of rejection. After nearly quitting acting completely. After watching younger, Prettier actors bypass him for roles he'd never get. Rawhide premiered on CBS on January 9, 1959. It was a hit. Suddenly, Clint Eastwood had steady work, a character, recognition. But here's the brutal truth. Rawhide was a trap. By 1960, at 30 years old, Clint was making decent money, around $750 to $1,000 per episode across 26 episodes a season, roughly $26,000 a year. Comfortable for 1960, but he wasn't a star. He was a television actor. And in 1960, television actors were considered second-class citizens in Hollywood. Movie studios didn't want television faces. Clint Eastwood was trapped in a medium-budget Western series that would run for 8 seasons. He was Rowdy Yates, forever the sidekick to Eric Fleming's trail boss. Never the lead, never the name above the title. At 30, he had steady work, but he was invisible. And Rawhide was dying slowly. By 1960, Westerns were already becoming oversaturated. The golden age was ending. Clint could feel it, the slow descent into irrelevance. He had a 3-year-old son, Kyle, born May 19, 1968. Wait, Kyle was actually born later. Let me correct. Clint was married to Maggie Johnson since December 19, 1953, at 30. They were still childless, struggling financially despite Rawhide's modest success. He had stability, but stability isn't stardom, and time was running out. The tragedy of Clint Eastwood at 30 wasn't a single devastating event. It was slower, quieter, more suffocating. It was watching James Dean become a legend at 24 and die at 24, all before Clint booked his first speaking role. It was watching Steve McQueen explode onto the scene with Wanted, Dead or Alive in 1958, younger, hungrier, more electric than Clint could ever be. It was sitting on the set of Rawhide in 1960, reading scripts for films he'd never be considered for. War movies, dramas, anything that wasn't a dying television Western. The silent heartbreak of mediocrity. Clint had been acting for 6 years by 1960. He'd appeared in dozens of productions, and nobody outside of Rawhide fans knew his name. His marriage was strained. Maggie had married a swimming instructor with dreams, not a struggling actor with inconsistent paychecks. Even with Rawhide, money was tight. Clint sent most of his earnings back to support his parents. He was 30 years old, the same age James Cagney was when he was already a Hollywood legend. The same age Humphrey Bogart was when he was fighting for leading roles. But Clint Eastwood was playing second fiddle on a television show that critics barely noticed. What few people know is how close he came to quitting. In 1960, Clint seriously considered leaving acting entirely. He'd saved some money from Rawhide, enough to start over, maybe go into business, real estate, construction, something stable. Maggie wanted stability, a family, a real life. But Clint couldn't let go, not because he loved acting, but because he hated losing. There's a specific kind of devastation that comes from being almost good enough, from being cast but never chosen, from working constantly but never mattering. That was Clint Eastwood at 30, on January 1, 1961. He made a decision. He'd give himself 5 more years. If he wasn't a movie star by 35, he'd quit. 5 years. That was the deal he made with himself. The world saw Rowdy Yates riding cattle across the television screen, but the truth was different. Behind the cowboy hat was a man, drowning in obscurity, fighting a silent battle against time, against Hollywood's indifference, against his own fading dreams. At 30, Clint Eastwood had everything a man was supposed to want: steady work, a wife, a home. But he didn't have the one thing he actually wanted to matter. And that quiet desperation, that invisible heartbreak was eating him alive. The phone wasn't ringing with movie offers. The scripts weren't arriving. Hollywood had given him a steady job and forgotten about him. It is heartbreaking when the world decides you're exactly good enough to be mediocre. When casting directors say, "Get me that guy from Rawhide," for a 2-line part, but never for a lead. Clint Eastwood at 30 was a man in purgatory, successful, Enough to survive, not successful enough to escape. But here's what makes this story different. Clint Eastwood didn't know it in 1960, but salvation was coming. From Italy, from a director named Sergio Leone who'd never heard of Rawhide. From a character called the Man with No Name. In 1964, during Rawhide's hiatus, Clint would fly to Spain and Italy to film a low-budget western called A Fistful of Dollars for $15. He almost didn't take it. The script was weird. The director spoke no English. The budget was tiny, but he took it, and it changed everything. By 1966, Clint Eastwood would be an international superstar. By 1971, he'd direct his first film, Play Misty for Me. By 1992, he'd win the Academy Award for Best Director for Unforgiven. Today, at 94 years old, Clint Eastwood has directed over 40 films, won 5 Academy Awards, and earned a net worth estimated at $375 million. But none of that existed at 30. At 30, he was nobody. At 30, Clint Eastwood stands as proof that your timeline doesn't determine your destiny. From San Francisco to Hollywood, from $75 a week to $375 million. From Cowboy Number 3 to the greatest Western icon in cinema history, the man who was told his Adam's apple was too big became the face that defined American masculinity for generations. The man Hollywood rejected dozens of times became Hollywood's most respected director. Clint Eastwood at 30 was invisible, but he refused to disappear. If this story touched your heart, leave a tribute below. Share a moment when Clint Eastwood's quiet strength reminded you that patience and persistence still matter. That being overlooked doesn't mean being defeated. That 30 isn't too late. That 40 isn't too late. That legends aren't born. They're forged in the brutal, silent years when nobody's watching.